Hey y'all, I want to share something today about the Bible that I think is going to rock your world. It is pretty legit, so I'm excited to share it with you. So most of us, when we say the Bible, we take for granted that we know what that means, like what is contained in the Bible. And we really should not take that for granted, because this was something that was not even decided among the Jews before Jesus came. They did not agree on what should be in the Old Testament. The Sadducees, who were more the priestly class, did not believe in any of the books of the Bible outside the first five, called the Pentateuch, so penta meaning five, the five books of Moses, so Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They did not believe any of the writings after that as being sacred scripture. The Pharisees, however, did adhere to more books of the Bible. I'm going to wait to give you the number to give a little bit of background here. And this is super important so we can know, how do we trust what should and should not be in the Bible. So again, there's a dispute. They don't agree at the time of Jesus, right? There is a version of the Bible at the time, or of some sacred texts, called the Septuagint, okay? And it's called the Septuagint because tradition says that 70 translators all went and wrote out these writings in Greek, came back, and they were word for word exactly the same. There were no differences between how they translated it. So that's where the tradition called the Septuagint comes from. So it is an Old Testament that's written in Greek, okay? So the Septuagint has 7 more books in it than the Old Testament that would only have Hebrew originals. So I'm talking about, you've got the 5 that the Sadducees believe in, and then when you include the Pharisees believe in 39 total books. So 34 the Sadducees don't accept, okay? All right? At least. So let's say at least, okay? If they follow the Septuagint, it'd be 46 books in the Old Testament, okay? So we get to the whole topic of Protestant Bible versus Catholic Bible, right? The Protestant Bible accepts the 39 Old Testament books, and the Catholic Bible has 46 Old Testament books. How does this come about? So, as I said, the Jews did not agree in Jesus' time about the books in the Bible. Well, in the 1st century AD, after Jesus dies, remember the New Testament is written in Greek, just like the Septuagint, the 46 book Old Testament, right? Because Greek is the new language now. So the New Testament is in Greek. The Jews, in order to say that Jesus is not the Messiah, they meet and decide on what is sacred scripture. Can we come to an agreement across our different sects of Judaism, different groups of Judaism? And they agree to only count books that have Hebrew originals as part of the sacred scriptures. Why partially do they do this? Because this eliminates the Greek New Testament. Just by making that the rule, gets rid of the writings about Jesus as the Messiah, because they don't accept Jesus as the Messiah, right? Well, in doing that, they obviously lose the 7 books, so they don't accept the 46 book canon of the Old Testament. They take the 39 book, and that is their sacred text. Well, how do we resolve this as Christians today, what we should follow? And I understand this, ruffle some feathers for those that have grown up Protestant, are Protestant, grew up Catholic, left to be Protestant, whatever it is, okay? But it's a very logical, coherent thing here. So Catholicism accepted the 46 books, right, of the Old Testament up until the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s, and in actually 382, I believe, AD, the Council of Rome, which was led by a pope at the time, Demicus, they kind of preliminarily codify, hey, here's what's in sacred scripture, and includes the 46 books, not the 39, the 46, okay? And I'm going to get into why. So they do that. Then the 1500s and the Protestant Reformation, with Luther and others, they go back to what the Jews decided at in the first century after Jesus passed away, had died. And again, that council where the Jews decided is called the Council of Yamnia. They decided to go with the 39 the Jews agreed on and said, look, you guys are rejecting what the Jews thought. That's what they're telling the Catholics. You guys reject what the Jews thought was sacred scripture. Okay, here's where it gets interesting. What is the Old Testament version that is most quoted in the New Testament? So in the New Testament, the writers will often directly quote the Old Testament, right? And even Jesus. The text most of the time, it's like 80% of the time, that is quoted by Jesus and in the New Testament is from the Septuagint. So Jesus is quoting the version of the Old Testament that has 46 books, not the one that has 39. So it makes things very interesting to say, well, if Jesus is quoting this as part of Scripture, how do we then say, well, no, these are not really, part of Scripture, right? That makes it problematic. And so that's why I would defend the Catholic version, if you want to say, of the Old Testament as sacred scripture, because it's the version that's quoted in the New Testament the most of any version of the Old Testament. Jesus himself quotes using the Greek Old Testament. And it's also the accepted Old Testament from right after Jesus' death. And we'll even say the 300s, right? The 300s up until the Reformation. So it's 1,200 years. Do we want to go back and say that the first 1,500 years of Christianity, nobody listened to Jesus? That's problematic, I think. And we'll get into that as a later topic as well. So this is the kind of the first of multiple parts, but the two main parts are this video on the Bible, how we understand what's in it, at least from the Old Testament. And the next one will be on authority. Do we need an infallible authority to understand what Jesus wants us to know today and wants us to live today? Thank you, guys.